for today's activity, if there is a character that you have, or some of you say you have several of these characters that you have, you can use them in what we're going to do today, or you can draw something brand new from scratch, whichever you want to do. So today, sorry, give me just 1 second. I think my dog is trying to get into trouble in the kitchen. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. I just gave him his dinner, and if no one is paying attention to him after he has his dinner, he'll go in the kitchen and steal the garbage and spread it out. He doesn't just go into the garbage and get things. He takes all of the garbage and spreads it out all over the kitchen floor so that he can pick out the parts that he wants to snack on. And so I have to make sure that he only does that after he eats. So he's gotten his dinner already, and he's like, oh, what else is there? And that's when he goes to the kitchen. And if I'm not paying attention, he will go and do it every single time. Then I have to clean it up. I haven't taught him how to clean it up himself yet, so it becomes a chore for me. Lay down. Good boy. So today is our last day of the Going Back to Basics project that we've been doing for the last 2 months. So over the last few months, we have talked about line and shape and space and color and gosh, I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but we've been through the fundamentals of art in the art classes, and we've translated that into some basics and fundamentals of joke writing, gag writing, sketch comedy writing in these classes. And so today, the goal is to put that all together. And so what I would like for us to do is for everybody to take all of the different little individual elements that we have looked at over the last few months and combine them, and each of us will create, I was going to say write a sketch, but you don't necessarily have to write it. You can write it if you want to, but another way that especially comedy writers working in animation will write the story is through a storyboard. How many know what I mean when I say storyboard? You guys have seen those before? Yeah, I'm sure that's been covered in other of the art classes. But yeah, so storyboard is basically exactly that. It's a board where you have little sort of almost like a comic strip that tells the story of the sketch. And I know some animated things operate with a script as if you were writing a regular piece of television or a regular sketch. I think shows like The Simpsons and Bob's Burgers, SpongeBob SquarePants uses a script. Those shows operate with a script. And then I know a lot of other shows that they don't even write a script at all. They just have the storyboard. And so however you want to tell your story, however you want to outline the story for yourself, you can do it either way, storyboard or writing. But we'll just go through the whole process, and we'll take all the things that we have looked at in these fundamentals and go through the process and put in as we go the things that we've learned into this process. And then at the end of it, you will have a new little animated comedy sequence or story sequence for either a character that you create today or one of your characters that you have that you've been working on for a while. So I think that'll be fun, and I'll do it along with you. So I'll be coming up with my own thing off the top of my head as well. So the first thing that we have to do is to come up with a comedic premise. Now, we talked about comedic premises a few weeks ago when we were talking about space, because the comedic premise lives in the space between the actual reality and the comic reality. So the premise is, what's the difference between those two things? What's going on that causes the real reality to not be the perceived comic reality? So to develop that, you can take something everyday, something mundane, and that's your starting point. That's the actual reality. And then you can build off of that and make it something crazy. So that's your comic reality. So if we look at something like a Wile E. Coyote cartoon, the real reality is coyotes chase after prey, such as roadrunners, small animals, and they have to hunt them to eat to survive. And the comic reality is this coyote can't seem to catch a prey, can't seem to catch a roadrunner, can defy gravity, has unlimited disposable income to buy things from a catalog to try to capture the roadrunner. All of these different things. And so that's the comic reality. Same thing if we look at a Bugs Bunny Elmer Fudd cartoon. The simple base reality is you have a hunter. He's going hunting for rabbits, and he's trying all these different ways to catch the rabbit, but Bugs Bunny always finds a way to outsmart him. And even a lot of your Bugs and Daffy cartoons, they start out with this very simple premise of Bugs and Daffy trying to go on vacation somewhere, usually Pismo Beach. And then the comic reality is that they end up taking a wrong turn at Albuquerque, and they wind up in the Himalayas, or they wind up in a genie's treasure cave. So many different versions of what happens when Bugs and Daffy take a wrong turn, and then the comedy ensues when they have to deal with that new situation that they're in. So, for right now, you're going to come up with a comic premise for your characters. We don't have to come up with the characters yet. If you already know you're going to use a character that you have drawn before, you can do that. But I want you to just come up with the comic premise. Something normal or regular or simple is supposed to happen, and then what is the twist or the turn that makes that be a comic premise instead. Just a few that I have. You don't have to pick one of these, but you can use one of these if you're having trouble getting started. Something like going to the store, cleaning your room, going on a hike in the woods, being at an amusement park, going on vacation. You want to take one of these. Each of those is something that's a very simple thing. We're just going to do this regular thing, and then you come up with the crazy thing that happens. So everybody can work on that. If you're having trouble coming up with an idea, remember some of the tools that we talked about before, where one of them is you can write a list of things, write that same list, and then put them together and combine things. You can have someone else, or have your pick 3 things out of a book, or come up with 3 random things off the top of your head, but to take 3 things and try to connect those 3 things in some way. And that can be a comic through line. Or you can do a drawing on the top of your head where you try to think of, if you say, take the comic premise of going to the store. Okay, so I'm going to draw a picture of what happens when I go to the store, and then you look at the drawing. Oh, that looks like there's a crazy blob monster. So what happens if when I go to the store, there is being overrun by crazy blob monsters? So those are some ideas. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pop on a cartoon, and I want you to brainstorm and come up with some ideas during the cartoon, and I'll check in with you after that. But I want you to, during the cartoon, I want you to come up with your comic premise. What is the thing that you're starting with that should be regular, and then where does that go into the bizarre comic world? So that's step number one. We'll pick a cartoon. Let's see, what's a good one? We'll go with, here we go. I don't think we've watched this one yet.
We're watching a cartoon, but we only do that on Mondays.
What's that?
Don't we only do cartoons on Mondays?
No, we always have a cartoon in this class. Sometimes we have a couple of them. So we'll watch the cartoon, but also don't forget to work on your premise while we're watching. So here we go. All right. So I find it interesting that you all are always trying to find people logic in these cartoons, but the whole idea is this idea that we call clown logic. It's like it makes sense to the characters, but it doesn't make sense to actual logic, right? So things like why does the spell only affect the vampire? Well, because it does. That's why. And like how does Bugs not realize he's in a Transylvanian castle? Well, because we need him to have that misunderstanding for the comedy to be there. It's like when we watched the Abbott and Costello Who's on First routine, and if at any point along the way Costello says, "Oh, I get it," then the joke is over, right? So we need that misunderstanding. We need that conflict to be there in order to make the joke work. So it's clown logic. It's not real logic. So I like that one. That one, I picked it at random, but it's got a lot of good stuff that as we continue, we can refer back to as we write our own comedic sketch. So I hope all of you were able to come up with a good comic reality premise. Mine was that I picked going to an amusement park. So my characters are going to go to an amusement park, and what happens is that it actually turns out to be an abandoned amusement park, but they don't realize it, and it's haunted. So a haunted, abandoned amusement park is what ends up being the switch on that. So haunted, abandoned amusement park. So that is mine. Hopefully you have yours. So the next thing is that we want to identify the conflict. So the conflict here in this sketch at first was, like we were talking about, Bugs doesn't realize that he's not where he was intending to be. So that's the first part. So that's a inner conflict, right? So the three types of conflict that we can have is an inner conflict. We can have a global conflict, which is where you're having to deal with either the world, like you're having to deal with weather conditions, or you're having to deal with societal constraints or something like that. The conflict is with the world at large and a global conflict. Interpersonal conflict, which is between two people, which is what happens later on in this sketch when it becomes a battle between Bugs and the vampire. So we start out with an inner conflict, which is a conflict that's going on within yourself. So Bugs thinks he's supposed to be in one place and he's actually in another place and he doesn't realize it. So that's an inner conflict. So for my sketch, the characters think that they're at an amusement park, but they don't know that it's actually a haunted, abandoned amusement park. So that's going to be another example of an inner conflict. So they don't realize what's going on. Now, we might switch, like in this sketch later on, we might switch to more interpersonal conflicts, like if there's a ghost or something that they come up with, or perhaps the rides or the attractions that they go on start acting crazily. That would be kind of a global conflict, that the whole park is against them, that kind of thing. So we can go down any path we want to, but to start off, we have an inner conflict. So the next thing is we want to identify our characters. So we talked last week about comic duos. So if you feel really passionate about not doing it as a duo, so for example, if you have a character that you want to be solo in this scene, sorry, I dropped my pencil. You can do it that way, but I encourage you to try to come up with a comic duo. And the duo, as you create them, can be different in personality, or they can be different in the way that they look, or they can be different in both. So I gave you guys the example last week of my two characters of Hector and Herbie. One is a small little chimp. He's kind of brainy and bossy. And then there's Herbie, who is the big giant gorilla. He's kind of a gentle giant, sweet, goes along with Hector no matter what. So they're different in personality, and they're different in the way that they look. So so now I want you to take a moment and work on your characters a little bit. And just so that we're not sitting here watching the tops of each other's head as we draw, I'll put on another cartoon. We might not go all the way through this one because I just want something to be on in the background. But let's see. Let me see if I can find a good comic duo one. Well, you can't go wrong with a comic duo with Roadrunner and Coyote. So and they don't talk, so we won't be distracted by them. So you can check in with this cartoon every once in a while, but we're really just going to be, I really want you to draw out, and if you can, describe your character. You don't have to write it down, but I'd like for you to share them with us, and then you can tell us a little bit about the personalities of your characters. And again, these can be characters that you've worked on before and that you like, and you want to try to write a situation for them, or it can be totally brand new characters. But I would like for you to come up with a good comic duo. I'll show you my two characters. These are two characters. When I was in 5th grade, we had a school newspaper, and I got to draw the comic strip for our school newspaper when I was in 5th grade. And these were the two characters that I had, and I've been drawing them ever since then. Every once in a while, if I'm bored, or if I'm at a meeting, or if I'm sitting around waiting somewhere and I can just doodle around, I will end up doodling these two characters. But it's Hobart the duck and Rocco the dog. And every day when Rocco's owner goes to work, he sneaks under a hole in the back fence and runs down to the park where he meets up with his pal, Hobart the duck. And then they get into some kind of adventure or scrape. And Hobart is a really surly, grumpy, cranky, kind of lovable curmudgeon, kind of like a Squidward from Spongebob. And then Rocco the dog is real happy, energetic, plucky, excited about everything. And so they're a fun comic duo because they kind of represent some opposites. And then they also have opposites, comic opposites, in that one is a wild animal and one is a domestic animal. And so those are the two characters that I'm going to send to the, what did I say? The haunted amusement park. So those are going to be my two characters to get. They head off to an amusement park. They think they're going to have fun, but it turns out to be an abandoned, haunted amusement park. So who else wants to share? Someone said they wanted to share before we even started. Who was that?
So when you did this thing where I did that, I actually somehow managed to make a happy 3D dinosaur. I don't know how. So I just implemented that.
Fantastic.
It isn't supposed to look good. It's just supposed to look very sketchy and unfinished. That's what I was going for.
Yeah, I like that. That's very stylized. Yeah. And to answer your question, did I copy SpongeBob and Squidward? To be quite honest, I was in 5th grade long before SpongeBob and Squidward were a thing. But that kind of duo is very archetypical and very. We talk about stock characters and some of the same characters that end up showing up over and over in comedy. So it is true that sort of relationship happens a lot in comedy, where you have that type of personality difference. But good catch. Yes, it is very similar to Squidward and SpongeBob, but Hobart and Rocco came first. Yeah, and Jay explained exactly that. Excellent. So does anyone else have any characters they want to share?
I'd like to share a finished storyboard.
You want to share what?
A finished storyboard.
Sure. Yeah, ain't nobody. Pinky in the Brain. Another great example.
So it's technically not a comic duo, but I just made this video game mixed with real life, where there's a car race and someone's holding a shell from Mario Kart, and the car gets hit and everyone gets shot, and the car starts to shake and then it starts hitting a wall.
Very cool. I like it. Okay, so now we have our comedic premise. We have our comic duo, our character types that we're going to put into this comedic premise. We identified the type of conflict, and all of that. We do all of that. If we were writing this as a sketch, if we were doing this as an animated cartoon, we would do some of this kind of internally. We wouldn't actually write all this down and discuss this as a group and be like, okay, so what type of conflict are we going to go with? Is this going to be a global conflict? Or we would all kind of understand that as a group as we're writing. We would just go, oh, and in our minds, I come into the room and I pitch Hobart and Rocco. They're going to an amusement park. Turns out it's a haunted abandoned amusement park, and everybody would go, oh yeah, okay. So and we would all just sort of be on the same page with telling the story in that way. I'm just saying it out loud because knowing knowing what the premise is, knowing who the characters are, knowing what type of conflict we're dealing with, helps us to be all on the same page when we're collaborating on something together. So the next thing is that we would want to apply a comedic genre, right? So we have talked about we watched the movie One Froggy Evening, and that's a comedic style called the eyebrow effect, where everything you do to try to make a situation better actually makes it worse. And when we watched One Froggy Evening, every time he tried to correct the fact that the frog only sang in front of him, he made it worse, and he ended up, poor, living on the park bench at the end. There's the Fish Out of Water. We watched Feed the Kitty to explain that one, where you have a character that's having to deal with a situation that they're not used to, like a fish out of water. Last week, we looked at Clash of Context. So that's where you put a character into a situation that they're not used to. And that Fish Out of Water is one specific version of that. But there are lots of other versions of that. It's like there's the rags to riches, or the riches to rags. There's the aliens coming down, the aliens exploring Earth from an alien perspective. All of those things that we talked about last week. And then we have the Simple but Impossible Task. That's a Coyote short, where very simple. All the Coyote really needs to do is to catch the Roadrunner so he can have a meal, but it's an impossible task. Everything he does fails. So it's a simple task, but it's an impossible task because everything messes up. If you look at, to take SpongeBob as an example again, I always use SpongeBob because I like SpongeBob, but Plankton trying to get the Krabby Patty recipe, simple but impossible task. And then there's an inappropriate response, where you take something that is very unimportant and treat it like it's very important. We watched the Steve Martin sketch with the diving, where he was diving into the water, and he was doing these really dumb, basically like little kid jumps into the pool, but they were treating it like he was an Olympic diver. So the inappropriate response can be taking something that is very mundane or unimportant and treating it like it's very important, or the opposite, where you take something that's very important and treat it like it's no big deal. And then the last one is parody. We watched the Three Little Bops for that one, where you take a style, or you take an existing story or a style, and you kind of make fun of that story, or you make fun of that style a little bit. So parody is of the Three Little Pigs. It was the Three Little Bops was a parody of that Three Little Pig story. So parody is the one that I'm going to go with for my story, because if we have these two characters going into an abandoned haunted amusement park, we can parody the tropes of a horror movie, right? So anything that might be in a scary movie, we can kind of make fun of that a little bit. And that cartoon that we just watched, the Transylvania 65000 one, that was a parody of like monster movies, right? So the things that we think of being associated with Dracula in Dracula movies, like him turning into a bat and all of that stuff, they're kind of made fun of a little bit. So parody, I think, works the best for my story here that I've created, because we can parody scary movie tropes. So things like there being a scary monster. We could even do like a parody of a scary clown thing. We could do a parody of gosh, I mean, there's just so many. You could even go movie by movie and just pluck out different tropes from movies that you could use. But at any rate, I think that parody is our goal for this because it's rife with material. So basically, what I would do if we were working on this in a room together, I would so if we were working on this together in a room, we would all basically be brainstorming ideas. Okay, what are the things that might happen in a scary movie? And everybody would throw out ideas, and we would jot them all down on a wall, and then individual people might go, oh, so if we do that one, then we can make fun of that by doing this thing. And then you would each start coming up with jokes that way. And that leads us into the next thing, which is writing the gags. And we've talked about different types of gags throughout this back to basics session. We did joke writing first, where you can literally just write verbal jokes. We talked about visual comedy, and we talked about physical comedy and slapstick. So those are all different types of gags that you can use when you're writing out your sketch. If we go back to the one that we just watched, there's wordplay when Bugs says he's fatigued instead of being fatigued. He's kind of playing around with the way that you pronounce that word. There's the wordplay when he says, I'm a vampire. And then Bugs goes, well, I'm an umpire. And then he says, well, I'm a bat. And he says, well, I'm a bat. And you see the kind of punny wordplay that they do there. So those are some verbal gags. Then we have the visual comedy of when he first shows up, there's the pupils, and he's looking at Bugs, and then the pupils go to one eye, and then they go to the other eye. And so there's a little bit of visual comedy there. There's the visual comedy when he says abracapocus, and he's got half of the bat and half of the vampire. Hocus cadabra, and then he's got half the vampire and half the bat. And then we get some slapstick in there when when they keep going back and forth. Abracadabra, hocus pocus, and the poor little bat keeps getting squished by the thing. There's a little bit of slapstick when he gets sprayed with the bug juice. So you have all at your disposal. Once you decide what your comedic genre is and what direction you're going, then you can just start taking all of those things and writing visual gags, verbal gags, and slapstick, physical comedy things, and start stringing them together until you have a 6 to 7 minute short. And then you have to figure out how you're going to wrap it up. Depending on what type of character you have, is you wrap it up. Either the character is going to be successful in what they wanted to do, or they're unsuccessful. And that has to do with the type of comic character that you're dealing with, right? So last week we talked about the idea of the red clown and the white clown. And the white clown kind of always has everything go their way, even though they're just kind of like goofing their way through life. That one that we just watched happens that way. Bugs Bunny comes out on top in the end. And so that's a more white clown ending. And then there's the red clown ending where things don't work out in the end, which is most Daffy Duck cartoons, most Wile E. Coyote cartoons, where they end up just kind of like defeated at the end of the cartoon. So whichever character or whichever clown your character embodies more, that'll kind of help you decide on what your ending is. Sorry, I see someone's asking a question, so I'm going to look at this real quick. What would go well in a comic duo with a loud, flamboyant character? gosh, I would just think of the different the different opposites of those adjectives you have there. That's when you're trying to find a comic opposite, that's the best place to start. If you say, okay, I have this character that's like this, and this, we'll take those adjectives and just pick the opposites. So if you were going with a loud, flamboyant character, I would say a character who's kind of meek and drab, maybe boring even, and putting those two together could be a good starting point for some conflict. Great. So as we go through all of these pieces, then we would start writing up a storyboard. So first part of the story is that the characters head off to the amusement park. That's the starting point. And then we start to realize that the what the characters think is happening is not what's actually happening, like at the beginning of the Bugs Bunny cartoon. So then we would storyboard that out, and we would see the different gags. We would start with all of our board of gags that we had come up with. All right, which ones do we want to actually use? Which ones are the funniest? Which ones getting the best response from everybody? And we would structure those together, just like we saw in that cartoon. Sometimes they don't necessarily have to go together in a story form. They can just be individual, like little gags on their own. The Bugs Bunny one we watched was a good example. Wile E. Coyote cartoons are pretty much always like that. Very rarely, sometimes, but very rarely is there like a through line where one gag leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. They're usually pretty well standalone. First he tries this, then he tries this, then he tries this, then he tries this, then he's not successful, and that's how it ends. Occasionally, the gags will have a through line. I think if you look at like One Froggy Evening or Feed the Kitty, What's Opera Doc we watched last week or the week before, those gags kind of build on each other and connect with a through line. So it can be either way. That's however you choose to structure yours. And so then you draw your storyboard, and then you wrap it up at the end. So that's how you take all of these elements of comedy that we have talked about over the last 8 weeks, and that's how you put them all together to create a comic short, whether that's an animated cartoon like the Chuck Jones ones we've been watching, or an episode of television, or even a feature-length comedy film, or a Saturday Night Live sketch. All of anything you're writing that would have comedy in it would follow this same process. You start with your comic premise. You figure out the characters. You figure out the type of conflict you're dealing with. You figure out the genre. You figure out your gags, what you want your gags to be, visual, verbal, etc., and pick the funniest ones, string them together either with a through line or without, and then based on what type of clown you have, red clown, white clown, that kind of gives you the way to wrap it up. Is the character successful or unsuccessful at the end? And if you go and look at any comedic thing that you watch, like I said, from an SNL sketch all the way up to a feature-length movie, if you watch it, you'll be able to spot this stuff. I encourage you to try that the next time you're watching something. Is see if you can spot the process throughout. And I think that the more you do it, the more you'll see it, and you'll see that structure go, oh, yep, that's where that is, that's where that is, that's where that is. So that's it. That's how we take the elements of comedy and put them together to create comic piece, whatever that may be. So I highly encourage you to take your ideas from today and turn them into a storyboard. I would love to see if you come up with a storyboard for any kind of comedic sketch, or even if it's an idea for a cartoon, if you want to share those. If you finish it up between now and next week, I'd love to see them next week. And if you have some, we can start off with that next week. Before we go, I do want to say that I do have to make the pitch one more time for the donation page. All of these classes are available for free because we have people who donate to the Chuck Jones Center for Creativity, and that helps us to keep things going. That helps us to make these classes possible and to continue to offer them for free when we can. And thank you, Tater, for the confetti toss. So please talk to your parents. Let them know how important these classes are to you, and how, if you're having a good time, and say that you want to keep supporting them by making a donation. So that's that. And any questions from anybody before we wrap up for today? So we did it. We went through all of the basics of comedy. We tied them all together. And next week we'll be starting with a brand new thing. Next month, yes, I will let you share your character in just 1 second, Tater. But while it's on my mind, next month, because March is Women's History Month, next month we will be focusing on great female comedians. So I give a lot of cartoon examples. I give a lot of silent movie examples that are some of the great male clowns. But next week we will move into a whole month of focusing specifically on great female clowns, and that'll be a lot of fun. There's some really brilliant performers who are women, and I'm looking forward to sharing and exploring comedy in that way with you. So that's what's coming up next week. I think the first week is all about stories. So I think we'll be looking at Whoopi Goldberg first. Some of you might know Whoopi Goldberg, and her ways of telling stories and her ways of deriving comedic stories. So that'll be next week. So before we head out, let's let Tater share his drawing.
I just got my boy Callisto over here. He's the loud, flamboyant one.
Fantastic. That's really great.
Like his second to the comic duo. But yeah, thank you.
Sure. I saw a hand from Yes. Yes, did you want to share something? No, maybe that was an accident. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. This was a ton of fun, and we'll see you all next week. Looking forward to starting a new unit with you next week. This will be fun.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you,
Same
Scott.
to you. Have a nice week.